The default conventions of the MVC framework allow you to get started very quickly, but sometimes you may want to bend MVC to your will. Let's mash on that.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the conventions that MVC uses and how you can override them to use your own conventions.
That is right, Simon. You have knocked that out of the park. That's what we're going to do. So the kinds of conventions that we're going to talk about today actually have to do with the conventions the framework uses to activate components in the execution pipeline. This means controllers, the actions, the properties inside of them, the filters, any aspect of the application that has an activation component to it. So not the conventions, for example, of the view locations or how you lay out your folders and where those go, but although you could do some of that as well through these conventions. However, we're going to look at a couple of interfaces that are kind of interesting, and actually it demonstrates the same way that the Web API conventions work inside of the new MVC space now that everything's merged together. So let's have a look at some of that. I'm going to start by looking at our startup. I'll just show you, this is a fairly bare bones project, and what I've done is taken a template without the identity pieces included, and all I've done is I've gone into my configure services method where we normally see services.add MVC. In my particular case, so this is where we add all of the dependent services and whatnot, and you can tell that we're, conventions. I was talking about activation, and you can think about things like dependency injection and things like that. So this is kind of related to those same kinds of services. And so what we're doing is adding our own conventions in here. We have the option to override what are there by default for conventions, but we also can just add to what's there, what's exposed by default in the MVC framework as well. So this is different from where we do the use MVC, which sets up our middleware for MVC handling the execution pipeline. This is up where we're actually configuring the services that are used. So I'll start by looking at this one that I've got in here called Interesting Application Convention. It's actually not that interesting, but it demonstrates how you can gain access to the different conventions that are actually used. So in here, for example,
it's still a more interesting convention than that accounting convention I went to once.
You're probably right, Simon. So here we have access to any of the conventions that are being used. So we have access to, at this point, target things that are explicitly at the API Explorer level, something that I think is worth diving into in a future episode, so we'll have a look at that later. But you can examine things like controllers, filters, or properties that are used. What's interesting about this is if I were to, for example, drill further in, not only do I have access to all the controllers, but I have access to the actions on those controllers, and inside one of those actions I have access to the parameters that are used as well, route values, things like that. So I can actually examine aspects of it and say, I want you to behave differently in this way. So let's have a look at an actual implementation of that. So you can see in startup here I've got this rabbit convention. So adding the rabbit convention is, you guys know that rabbits are really good at math, right? So if you add a rabbit convention to your application, it's going to start multiplying all of your actions. Rabbits.
Now I get.
Our jokes are just fabulous this episode.
I feel like that's a joke that would have went over well at the accounting convention.
It's all right. I already know the accounting joke. I only have one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Oh shoot! I don't actually know one.
Oh.
That was a joke. Apparently. If I was quicker on my feet, I would have put up an accounting joke.
It was like a rhetorical joke about accountants and how they're not funny, I guess. Is that it?
Sorry, okay. Accountants.
So this is, I mean, that would be all of our wives. So Okay, so what I've done here is I've actually created a controller convention. So in the other one, I was looking at an application convention, and so we've got these different conventions that we can use. So there's actually I will link to in the video notes. I'll make sure that we have a link in there to the blog post that I did that relates to this this episode. It actually breaks down all the different types of conventions that you can use. So in this particular case, we already looked at the application convention. This one is the controller model convention. So in this particular case, we actually have an instance of this controller. So we're able to apply this convention to the controller. So the first thing I do is I check and see if the convention is applicable. We'll come back to that in a second. And then what I do is I get I create a list of all of the actions, and then for every action in the controller, I basically create a new action that's prefixed with bunny. Okay, so if there's a home/index, then there's going to be a home/bunny index, because these things are multiplying like bunnies. Huh?
Yeah, we get it now.
Okay. I'll keep knocking it home if I need to. Just let me know if I need to slow it down. Okay, so what I do is I basically iterate over that collection of actions. I create I create a copy of it with a different name called bunny, and then we simply add it back into the controller actions. Now, this I kind of tease here because this is kind of a useless thing, but this is actually, if you think about how when we've got actions inside of a web API controller, how it's using like get and post and whatnot. This is what it's actually doing. In order to imply what method is to be invoked, they actually construct the actions required in order to be properly invoked using a set of conventions. So this is the same kind of thing that they're doing, iterating over the collection of actions that are on a controller and then coming up with appropriate named actions and adding those back into the controller as well, so that those are exposed to the framework, so that other conventions can kick in and invoke those by verb. Okay, so I had this is convention applicable, and this is kind of the kicker here. This is a way that I can use to control whether or not a convention is applied. And in this case, what I did is I checked to see if it has the marker interface of IamRabbit. So if a controller, if it has an attribute that implements IamRabbit. So we're basically looking, so all we've got in here is a simple interface, which is just a marker interface. And then we have a controller attribute, which implements the marker interface, but it also inherits from attribute. This lets me go into my controller and mark it with the Rabbit controller interface should I choose. So let me just pull this up really quickly in the browser, and we'll have a quick look at it.
So I noticed that one of those other conventions was the API Explorer, and I just happened to run into that the other day because I was messing around with Swashbuckle, which is that open API generator tool.
Right.
And that's how it works. Is it uses that application or that API Explorer
to walk across the exposed actions on the controller.
Right, and then it'll like pull the documentation for them and build that. I keep wanting to call it Swagger file, but Open API file.
Right, no longer called Swagger.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we're still accepting donations to buy me an updated box to work off of. So I've got home here. I'm going to do bunny index, which right now we're actually we're 404 in here, so we're unable to find it. So what I'll do is I'll enable that controller convention by applying the attribute to the controller, save that guy out, and when I refresh, compilation should kick in. Now, this actually might still not work simply because the conventions are applied at runtime, so I don't recall. It must be, well, it's recompiling the app, so it's probably having to go through the startup again as well. So it should collect this controller and multiply the actions for me as well. We'll just have a double C when this goes. Now, again, in this particular case here, in order to make this work, there we go. So bunny index is working, so it did kick right back in. Now, in order to make this work, I actually had to return the name of the index, and so this is kind of one of the things that I bumped into. Now, this wouldn't be required in instances where, for example, you've got something like with Web API, we're not actually returning views, right? So that doesn't come into play. But one of the things that I bumped up against was that in my home, inside views, home has an index CSHTML, but the default convention, again, for finding the view is to find the view that has the name of the method that of the action that we're invoking, right? So if the action name is bunny index, as it was in the browser, it's looking for a bunny index view. So I actually had to be explicit about naming it. I don't know if that's something that someone's going to bump into, but I thought it was worth noting because when you modify the conventions, you may end up having the butterfly effect might spread out into your application.
Right. So if you'd put in a bunny index at CSHTML, that's what would have been returned.
That's right. So
Okay.
for fear of it taking a long time, what I would need to do if I wanted to is I could actually take this out and then add another file in here called bunny index. So I'll just give that a try right now. We'll see what happens. See if the computer can keep up here with me renaming files. So if I add bunny index in there instead, and inside bunny index, we will scroll down right here. We'll add that in quickly. I like going off script.
What could go wrong?
My computer does not.
So you mentioned that the convention is that we go to the view that is the action name.
That's right.
Is that also a convention that we can override?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's another vector for that, but we could also do it here if we wanted to. So what did I find on that? I actually can't recall, but we'll do a follow-up on that because I also want to address the API Explorer a bit as well. So we'll follow up on a couple of other different types of conventions.
Right.
But for example, one of the other things that people do is they will actually, if you've got the other types of things that you can use for conventions is the view location, not so much the view name, but the view location I've seen as a convention. And the other thing would be if the URI contains information about the region that you're in. So if it's got an en-ca or an en-fr, then you could actually serve up different resource files or provide different resource files to your controllers when they're activated. So that's another option as well. So, so I'll save that there and go back to my home controller. Save that guy, head back into the browser. So I will return to index and let that reload. So now when I'm back on my index, you can see that it was as it was, and if I go to bunny index, it's going to locate that bunny's view.
There's the bunnies.
There's the bunnies. So you could actually, using a convention, have different views show up by using the default convention of the view locator based on the action name.
Sounds like a good way to make your application really complicated and show some job security.
Yeah, I think when you're modifying the conventions, that's probably a really important point is that, going into any MVC project, we've got some expectations about how the system is going to operate. So when you need to diverge from the conventions, you should make sure that it's very apparent to anybody who's going to be working on the project, because you will be leading everyone down a different path, one that is non-conforming to what's there in the base project.
All right, well, that seems like it could be a lot of fun. There's a lot of power inside of this application convention stuff. So I think that's something that we could explore a little bit more in future episodes and really find some fun ways to get ourselves into a whole mess of trouble.
A whole boatload of trouble.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how we can learn to abuse this. Should be good.
A rabbit swarm worth of trouble.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us again here on the ASP.NET Monsters. Remember to like, comment, share, and send us an email with your comments and questions, just like many folks do over on Channel 9 and on Twitter.
A hutch of trouble.
A whole hutch for the whole rabbit congregation. What do you call it? What is it called? It's not like a gaggle of rabbits.
I don't know.
What do you call a whole bunch of rabbits? We're going to need to figure that out. Whoever submits that in the comments, free stickers. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. Talk to everybody later.
Cheers.
Bye.